Hello grade 11 and welcome to your first revision worksheet video. In this video I'm going to be explaining the different parts of the worksheet which we read together in class and we answered. Okay, it's called A New Face of Hunger Without the Old Excuses, and of course this is within the theme of human rights. It's talking about a country called Niger in sub-Saharan Africa, and in the selection below the writer highlights the role of democracy and international aid in lifting the world's poorest countries out of their misery. And we know that Niger is one of the most underdeveloped countries and one of the poorest countries in the world. Okay, let's just read the introduction first. A new face of hunger without old excuses. The pictures are wrenching. A nomad holds an infant aloft, its gaunt head lolling dangerously. A father who has just buried his son asks God to forgive him for weeping publicly. A child in an emergency clinic awakens from a hunger-induced stupor only to moan and weep from the pain of his skin sores. Okay, the introduction is shocking. It is a brief story about a father who just lost his child, his son, and was weeping about it. He did lose it because he lost his child because of hunger, of famine. These images of victims of a food crisis in Niger, captured by a BBC television correspondent and shown around the world, look like something the world has seen before: the famine in Ethiopia in the later 1980s. Ethiopia is another African country that has experienced famine, and of course famine means hunger. That catastrophe prompted an extraordinary outpouring of generosity, along with a vow that the world would never again stand by as millions went hungry. Okay, in the 1980s, everybody, all the developed nations pledged that they would help out when nations go through famine. But we know that many nations are still going through this crisis. Niger, also now Yemen, due to the war that's still ongoing there, we see thousands of children, women and elderly dying because of hunger. Yet here it is again, far smaller in scale, yet replete with images of stick-thin children with hunger-swollen bellies clinging to bony, flat-breasted mothers. Once again, there is the question: what causes the calamities that invariably afflict the world's poorest corners? Of course, calamities also is a synonym for catastrophes. So the author here is wondering, and the purpose of the question is to make the reader anticipate the answer for that in the coming paragraphs. So, what causes those calamities in poor countries? The author answers: the immediate cause is certainly known: locust swarms and poor rains. Locusts, you know, those huge insects that invade and have recently invaded parts of the Arab world and eat the green and the non-green. Locust swarms, poor rains wiped out much of the nation's harvest and caused grain prices to triple. This is the immediate cause. But when misfortune strikes other countries, they can help their people with resources and by seeking aid from abroad. So what has gone so terribly wrong in Niger? Also, again, another question which the author expects you to read in the next paragraph. For decades, tens of years, famine was seen largely as a consequence of bad political leadership. Food scarcity in Ethiopia in the 1980s had natural causes, but its transformation into a deadly famine came to be understood as mostly man-made, the result of a regime's collectivist ideology. A regime is the ruling government, okay? And its pursuit of victory over insurgents without the regard to the well-being of its people. It seemed a neat illustration of Indian economist and philosopher Amartya Sen's dictum: no famine has ever taken place in the history of the world in a functioning democracy. So according to Amartya Sen, if the country is a democracy, famine will not exist, hunger will not exist, because the government will care more about its people than about engaging in useless wars. Okay, but that does not explain Niger's problem. Again, Niger is a democracy, so people vote for their leaders. It has been since 1999. It made this transition into a multi-party democracy. And when it did that, according to paragraph 6, it got a lot of aid from nations, from the World Bank, $1.6 billion. Yet, in paragraph 7, the author says, Niger still earns a horrifically high score, horribly high score on the index of human misery. Misery, people are miserable there. UNDP compiled this index, and according to it, it's just ahead of Sierra Leone, which is the most underdeveloped country in the world. So it's Sierra Leone and then followed by Niger. More than 25% of its children die before their 5th birthday. That's an appalling statistic. Those who survive go on to scrape a meager existence from a harsh, arid savanna that is barely suitable for farming and cattle grazing, yet has to feed 12 million people. Again, cyclical droughts take place every year, cyclical, yearly, okay? They occur again and again. And chronic hunger are a way of life. Life expectancy tops out of 46 years. So if you are a citizen in Niger, your life expectancy would be 46. You are likely to die at this age. Niger and its neighbors are textbook cases of what Columbia University economist Jeffrey Sachs calls the poverty trap. The new prescription he advocates, or he calls for, or he advises, is a large infusion of aid. Give them aid, but direct it to basic needs like growing food. Don't give them money directly. Help them grow food, provide access to clean water, and prevent diseases like malaria. Instead of just giving aid to the government, which is a poor idea, give aid to the poor by helping them grow, providing clean water, and preventing deadly diseases like malaria. Okay, the questions, by referring to paragraphs 1 and 3, describe the condition of poor children in Niger. We read that. According to those paragraphs, the children are in a miserable state. In paragraph 1, a father had just buried his child. Another child is suffering at the hospital. In paragraph 3, children have hunger-swollen bellies clinging to their very thin mothers. Now, in reference to paragraph 5, how does the example given clarify the words of Indian economist and philosopher Amartya Sen? Okay. It was an example of a non-democratic country which was poorly led by people that didn't care about the well-being of people. All they were concerned about was victory over insurgents while its people were hungry. And of course, he did give the example of the example that was given previously was the example of Ethiopia, which is not a functioning democracy. Okay, that's why its people went hungry. In light of what you have read in paragraph 6, what are the 2 benefits Niger has reaped from shifting to a market-driven economy? Okay, after reading paragraph 6, which we just did, Niger made a transition from a centralized state-run economy to a market-driven one, meaning a free economy like the ones we see in the Western world, earning praise and ultimately relief, aid or help, estimated at $1.6 billion in foreign debt from the World Bank. Number 4, name the most underdeveloped country in the world. Okay, Sierra Leone, according to paragraph 7. Niger lists as the 2nd least developed nation in the world, just ahead of Sierra Leone. Okay, now think critically before you answer the following questions. How does the author begin her article? Meaning, type of introduction. What type of introduction does the author use here? Okay, the image of the young child held by his father and the child dying in the emergency room. Okay, the author begins the article with a shocking image of a man who had just buried his child and another child suffering miserably in the hospital. Okay, so it's a shocking image, shocking fact. This technique aims at catching the reader's attention. Of course, state the significance as usual. catching the reader's attention and making them want to know more about the topic of hunger, which the author will illustrate in the article. Now state the function of the questions in the closing paragraphs 3 and 4. We already talked about those while we were reading. Why did the author give those questions? He did that. The questions at the end of paragraph 3 and 4 aim at making the reader curious, as we said before, about the answers and anticipate them in the next paragraph. And as you notice, when in paragraph 3 he asked, he answered in paragraph 4. And when in paragraph 4 he asked, he answered it in paragraph 5. So this is a method to keep the reader engaged. Identify the thematic relationship between paragraph 6 and 7, displayed here. Okay, when we say thematic relationship, a good idea would be take a look at the first part of the next paragraph. Yet, but don't write an answer before you read. Here, we're talking that Niger is a democracy. It has been since 1999. It has a free market. Yet, Niger still earns a horrifically high score. So in spite of all this, it's a functioning democracy, it got aid, yet it still ranks highly on the index of misery. So what's the thematic relationship? Knowing that here it's stating a contrasting idea to the one shown in paragraph 6, and it started with yet, which is a contrast signal. So the answer would be the relation is one of contrast. In paragraph 6, the author states that Niger transformed to a market-driven economy and got aid from the World Bank. State what the author says in the first paragraph. Then, in paragraph 7, the author says that it is still ranked as the second least developed nation in the world. He uses the transition yet to show the contrast. So in spite of it being you might also say it this way, in spite of it being a functioning democracy with a free market, it still ranks horrifically high on the index of misery. Okay, how does the author achieve credibility? Of course, we know the types of supporting evidence. Here, the author achieved credibility in the article by using statistics. Please give me the paragraph and give me the statistic. You can quote it if you are copy-pasting it. The author also uses the expert opinion of Columbia University economist Jeffrey Sachs, who calls for a large infusion to the basic needs, okay, providing access to drinking water and preventing diseases like malaria. I quoted it. I took it copy-paste, so I have to put it between quotations. And finally, he uses the real-life example of Ethiopia in paragraph 5, where he shows how certain ideologies and regimes could lead to hunger in a nation. So let's recap the types of supporting evidence we have. First of all, you have statistics, research results, figures, numbers. 2, you have real-life examples. And 3, you have expert opinions. All of them the author used in this article. Now the table here, the effects of poor leadership and the wrong kind of aid. What are their effects? This should be 2. The effects of poor leadership, according to the text, is hunger. Solutions, good leadership, meaning democracy in this case. The rule of the people, democracy, demo, meaning the people, cracy, meaning rule. Wrong kind of aid also leads to hunger, diseases, and death, because you need to help people with sustainability. You need to help them plan, not give them direct money. You need to provide them with vaccines. You need to provide them with good, clean water. Solution, right kind of aid, as we said, to agriculture, healthcare, prevention, water purification, and such things that will help a nation develop. Okay, paraphrase sentence number 1 in paragraph 5. Of course, when we paraphrase, we know the rules by now. We need to start with citation. In sentence 1 of paragraph 5 in the article, A New Face of Hunger, A New Face of Hunger Without Old Excuses, the author explains that for tens of years, here they said for decades, I have to rephrase it, I say for tens of years, poor decisions made by leaders in some countries have resulted in hunger in those nations, okay? As instead of saying consequences of bad political leadership, okay, the author explains that for tens of years, poor decisions made by leaders in some countries have resulted in hunger in those nations. Instead of famine, I wrote the word hunger. E, using context clues, okay, from the text, fill in the blanks with the correct word. Mr. Abdullah, a father of 7, lost his job, so the family had to scrape, taking what is barely left, something meager, something very small. Scrape along the little savings he had kept. Number 2, with a tiny extra, we see cash, meaning infusion, okay? Infusion of cash. They redirected money toward the diseases that caused the most suffering. 3, given the poverty that is a moral problem and in need of a solution, this makes particularly relevant to poverty ideology, meaning what you believe in, your beliefs, your political and religious beliefs. So ideology is at the center of this issue. 4, we all like a bit of tragedy, not least because it comes replete, meaning full of, replete with the complex, easily accessible emotions. Okay, finally, what does each underlined word refer to? Paragraph 4 here displayed, paragraph 6 also. But when misfortune strike other countries, they can help their people. There, of course, refers to other countries. And here, it has also made, let's start here, it has also made, in part at least, the painful transition from a centralized state-run economy to a market-driven one. Market-driven one refers to economy, of course. Okay, and this is it. For any further questions, you can, of course, tell me in class, or you can send me a message. See you. Bye.